Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Louisiana Unfiltered. I'm Kiran Chawla. First off, I cannot thank you all enough for all your kind words as I was out the last 2 weeks thanks to COVID. But guess what? We are back on track and now we have some great episodes coming your way. If you enjoy what we do, please hit subscribe and remember to tell your friends and family about Unfiltered with Kiran to help us spread the word. This week, we are diving into a gripping case from the 1980s that shook Baton Rouge to its core. It's the story of a child rapist gunned down at the airport by the victim's father, a tale that is as heartbreaking as it is compelling. Picture this. Like many kids around 10 or 12, Jody was involved in extracurricular activities, spending his time with siblings and friends and learning karate. His karate teacher, somehow, who earned his family's trust, turned out to be a predator. In this episode, we sit down with Jody, now in his 50s, as he bravely recounts his harrowing experience. He shares how it all began, the trauma he endured, and his journey through those dark times. From the abuse to his kidnapping and eventual rescue from California, Jody opens up about the impact this had on his childhood. He knew that if he ever told his father, it would end in violence. And it did. One fateful night at the Baton Rouge airport, a single bullet was fired with deadly precision. Join us as we unravel this intense and emotional story. This is Louisiana Unfiltered. Welcome back, everyone. This week's episode, we are talking to the victim of a sexual rape, well, pretty much a rape, a kidnapping. And then to top it off, your dad killed the man who was responsible on live television. We are joined by Jody Plauche. Jody, walk us through from the very beginning. I guess take us back. So let's go back to 1983, February, March of 1983. This is when everything kind of is starting, correct?
Right. So I think it probably would have been the fall, beginning of school year in my fifth grade year. I was going to Mayfair Elementary, and I got a flyer for, Boy Scouts of America or Campfire, it was Campfire, to do like 10 karate lessons. I was already playing football, basketball, baseball, soccer, and so as I was walking out, I remember crawling up the flyer and throwing it in the garbage can and didn't give it a second thought. Well, my little brother went to Jefferson Terrace, and they gave him the same flyer. He wasn't involved in any sports, so when he handed my mother his paperwork, I forget what grade he was in. I could figure it out, probably first or second grade. And my mother was like, well, Mikey's not involved in anything, so I'm going to enroll him into karate. And so she signed him up, but when she did, she signed me, my older brother, and her best friend lived up the street. They signed her son, Mark, up. So the four of us went to Jefferson Terrace to take karate, our first karate lessons. First karate lessons was done by a guy named Rick. Don't know his last name, but Rick didn't show up for the follow-up karate lessons. He was gone. Apparently, he just took the money. So Campfire felt bad about it, so they contacted a local up-and-coming karate teacher named Jeff Doucet, and he decided he was going to honor all of the lessons. We had like 9 lessons left, so he was going to honor the lessons. We weren't going to have to pay any more money, and if we liked, the karate with him, then, we'd work out some type of deal where we would continue taking karate. Mm-hmm. Well, we started taking karate from Jeff, and it was it's above an old supermarket in Mall City on, what's the name of that street? Anyway, irrelevant. But it was fun. We enjoyed taking karate from Jeff. So by the time the 10th lesson was up, we were like, yeah, we want to continue taking karate. At one time, Jeff was telling us about how he put together like a competitive fighting team where they would travel to karate tournaments and, New Orleans, Houston. Think of the Karate Kid. You know how the Karate Kid, they're at a tournament? Mm-hmm. It was like that. And so he asked my mother if we could go to the movies one night. It was going to be a Friday night because the Saturday they were going to New Orleans to fight into the tournament. And Jeff was like, this is just kind of like what we do. Before we go fight, we go out to the movies, we go have a good time. So my mother was like, all right, let me see about it. She called my uncle that worked at the sheriff's department. She said, look, can you run a background check on this guy? And he claimed he did and said there was nothing wrong with Jeff. Nothing came up, maybe a few parking traffic tickets or whatever.
Why do you say he claimed he did?
Because I believe that there were crimes that Jeff had committed, not sexual, but like grand theft auto, that he had been arrested in Lake Charles for, that probably would have shown up on his record if he would have checked. Okay. So not that my mother would have been, and if my mother would have said, Jeff, you've got this grand theft auto, he'd have came up with some lie. Oh no, well, my ex-girlfriend let me borrow the car and then she called the cops. Yeah, it'd have been something. Okay. So it really wouldn't have mattered, I don't believe, at that point. And so my mother was like, yeah. So we go to the movie. It's called They Call Me Bruce. It was a karate movie. It was terrible. And after, my cousin was having a birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese, and so we knew that. And so Jeff was like, all right, let's go to Chuck E. Cheese. So we all go to Chuck E. Cheese. Well, now Jeff not just, knows my parents, but he gets met and introduced to my aunts and uncles and my cousins. And so now, we're having a good old time. And this goes on. And over time, eventually Jeff would come over to the house on the family weekends. And I never forget this one time. Jeff had spent the night, and not sure at this point whether he had been touching me or not, but I mean, it was around the time it began. And my dad, all right, Jeff, come on, we got to go. We were going to go to my grandparents' house that Sunday, which we always did. And so my dad dropped Jeff off at the karate school because that's where he lived. And it was right there on the old Tiger Bend split, where it's a building right by the split across from Callaway's. And so my dad dropped him off there. And before we got to the light at Stumberg, all of a sudden my dad's just crying like a baby. Like, Dad! I said, what's wrong, Daddy? He's like, he's just pitiful. I feel so sorry for him. So my dad turned around, went back to the karate school, got Jeff, brought him back to the house, let him shower, gave him fresh shirt to wear, and brought him to his parents' house for Sunday dinner.
Oh, wow.
And so, that's, the level
of trust,
the violation of trust that eventually was going on. And so around February, March, I want to say February, we were coming home from karate schools practice, and I'm thinking it had to be around Mardi Gras holidays, because I don't think it was during a weekend. It was during a week, so we were going to take extra karate lessons because we had extra time. And Jeff offered, hey, June, you know what, I'll bring him home. You just stay home, cook dinner, stay in the kitchen with the baby on your hip. And so my mother was like, oh, that'll be great. And so after karate practice, Jeff brought us home. Well, once we got into the neighborhood, he was like, hey, who wants to drive the car? What 10-year-old doesn't want to drive the car? I mean, it's something every 10-year-old wants to do. So, who wants to go first? Me. All right, come on, Jody. And I'm driving around the neighborhood, and all of a sudden, Jeff's hands go into my lap, very briefly, almost to the point where I'd be like, "Oh, Jeff, what are you doing? Oh, my bad, accident." He could have, faked away it. I can't think of the word right now, but he just brushed it off. And I was like, "Oh," and then he moved his hand, so I was like, "Okay, maybe he didn't know. Maybe it's an accident." And then, as I make the right at the corner, it happens again, but it's not long enough to like really register. It was long enough to go like, that's not comfortable. And I even remember thinking, my mother had made us watch this show called Fallen Angel. And it was about a guy who was luring these kids into child porn. Same thing, just grooming them, trying to get them out there. And I remember thinking, what if this guy's like Howie? What if he's like that guy? And so that's one of the things I think that because of that, I never blamed myself. I knew immediately that, okay, he might be one of these people it's their fault, their problem. It's never the kid's problem. And so I was thinking that at 10 years old. And so I think it was March. We were going crawfishing. So Jeff had got us a hotel room on Airline Highway at the Days Inn that just got torn down and gentrified or whatever. And so we were staying at that hotel. And the way Jeff would do it is we'd have a bed, 2 beds. And 4 kids would be in this bed, 3 kids would be in this bed, with Jeff being here. So he isolated me and could turn his back. And I was on those who just don't know where here is. It's me. I'm on the end of the bed, and Jeff is like the second one in. So that way he could turn his back, and then he can inappropriately touch me without anybody else knowing it. And so this night before we went to the crawfishing, Jeff started to fondle my male parts, and I was pretending to be asleep because I didn't want Jeff to know I was awake and knew he was doing this. And so he did that all night long. He would not leave me alone. So we go crawfish, and again, here's where the good with the bad comes. All right, so we go out crawfish, and we had a great time. I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, crawfish and water moccasins everywhere. We caught a lot of crawfish. And so we went to Highland Road Park to do the crawfish bowl. And at one point, we had to go get some more lemons or something. And Jeff's like, hey, I'll go ride. Jody, come ride with me. And it was right then that when we're on our way to I think, Winn-Dixie, Jeff says, did you say anything about what I do? And now I'm thinking, okay, I was sleeping. I don't know what you do. And I said, what are you talking about? And that was it. And he goes, okay, that's it. And so that, I think, is when he knew that he had me, where he knew that, okay, I can step it up and he won't tell. And so April, late April, we go to Houston on a karate trip. And
this is 1983.
1983, April.
And how old are you?
It was probably a week before my 11th birthday.
Okay.
And now, is this podcast, is it PG or PG-13? Do you want me to say the words that he used? Okay. So he goes, we're in the van. There's like 8 of us in the van. So he's like, Jody, come here. And so I go up to the front of the van, and he just pulled me over, and he's like, tonight I'm going to suck your dick. And I was like, why would you want to do that? And so I was like all nervous. And that was it. He didn't say nothing else. And so everything's going normal. We're in bed, same formation, 4 kids in this bed, 2 here, Jeff, then me. And it was an old John Wayne movie. I forget which one it was, but and it's not because I blocked it out. It's just been 41 years. And all of a sudden, he went underneath the covers, and he performed oral sex with me, and then he started doing that probably for the next month. And in May is when he was like, all right, now I'm going to fuck you. And so from middle of May to he got arrested. Well, when I was kidnapped, he kind of had other things on his mind, so he wasn't thinking about me. And so as far as sexually, pretty much every day he would perform oral sex with me, and then he would have sex with me. And he'd make up excuses. Jody's got to do extra training. Y'all go get some candy and some whatever across the street. Get me a Snickers, or something, just an excuse to get the kids out of the karate dojo. And eventually, the summer, I want to say late August, my parents split up. And that's when Jeff had actually more access and more time to me. And he'd go, June, can Jody stay, Friday night with me at the karate studio? And we'd end up spending a night at the karate studio. But then now you're looking at, 3 times a night. So it was he was very, very, must have had a high testosterone level because he was very, very active.
But Jody, tell me what was going through your mind at this time?
Well, I knew, at this point, I knew he was one of them crazy people that I'd been warned about. But I also felt that I was in a position to where I couldn't say anything because I knew it would upset my parents. And I tell people all the time, I wrote it in the book, people say, well, why didn't you tell? And I'm like, because I knew my dad would kill him. And when my dad found out, that's exactly what he did.
So the very first time that he does this to you during the John Wayne movie, what was going through your mind?
It's hard to explain, okay, because there was a lot of confusion going through my mind. Because like I said, I didn't know why he wanted to do that. But as soon as he did, and my body felt the pleasure, even though my mind's like, this is crazy, your body responds like a human body responds. And I think that a lot of survivors of sexual abuse, that's where their guilt comes from, is because, they're 7 years old. They don't know that this is wrong. Their body's responding like a body. And then when they get to be 16, they realize, oh, wow. And so that I included that in the book because it's very important that victims of sexual abuse know that your body is just responding how a body responds.
When Jody keeps referring to a book, he has written a book about everything that has happened, his entire story, called Why, Gary, Why? So when he's saying that, that's what he means.
Well, and then I went on to work at a place called Victim Services. And I'm not jumping ahead of myself, but at Victim Services of Montgomery County in Norristown, Pennsylvania. And I learned a lot. I was a certified sexual assault counselor, so I've taken my experience those 7 years. That's included in there.
Good.
There's a lot of good information for parents. There's a lot of good information for survivors. So, I mean, it's not just me telling my story. There's a lot of other good information out there.
Good. And again, guys, it's called Why, Gary, Why? So, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and say this, Jody. In being a reporter for so long, I've interviewed so many people who unfortunately have been the victim of a sex crime, but the way you just explained it makes perfect sense. And yeah, a lot of the times the survivors feel this guilt trip that I allowed it.
Well, and another thing too is, the emotional connection that they create. The one thing that, kept me from telling was I like Jeff. I like being around Jeff. I just didn't like that one aspect of Jeff, the whole sexual component. But other than that, we're going to the mall, we're going to the movies. I forgot to put this in my book, but I found it very ironic that if you've ever seen the movie Sudden Impact, that's the one where Clint Eastwood was like, go ahead, make my day. And it's a story about a woman, her and her sister were at this beach party and they were gang raped. And then the sister was catatonic. She was in a mental facility, and the sister was visitor, and she said, I ran into one of them, and I bought a gun. And so she ended up killing one of the rapists. And then she went around hunting down all the other rapists and killing them, and that's what the whole movie is about. Me and Jeff saw that movie in the theater 3 times.
Wow.
Yeah, I feel like that's something I should have put in a book, but I forgot. The summer of 83, my parents split up because my dad drank a lot. And my mother was sick of his drinking. Had nothing to do with she found her or a younger man. I can assure you that. And things started to get worse with Jeff because now he had written some hot checks around town. And I actually ran into a guy last week, and he had flown in from, I want to say California. Another friend had flown in from Corpus Christi and someone from New York City. And they were going to some friend of theirs' funeral. And he saw the book, and he's like, the karate guy? I was like, yeah. And he goes, that son of a bitch owed us some money because he had written a bad check for a karate tournament. And I'm like, yep, that's the right Jeff Doucet, because he had, he's passing bad checks. He had started a business up. It was called Rags to Riches. He uses the kids. And he actually got Bobby Freeman to endorse him. Bobby Freeman was the lieutenant governor. We appeared on Morning in Louisiana. And we actually stuck around after Morning in Louisiana, and we did the Monday Morning March with Buckskin Bill. Mm-hmm. And so with that business, it was a coffee mug, and it was going to be like a commemorative LSU 1983 coffee mug or mason jar stuffed with pralines and with the score of each game. And luckily, that didn't go through because that 83 season wasn't great. But anyway, so he took pre-orders, got all the pre-orders, never came out with the product. So all these people wanted their money. And then another guy named Don Landers, he owned the Cracker Barrels, not the little country store, but like the old Circle K type stores. He had like 37 around the area. And so he came up with the idea, which was a really good idea, the LSU bandana, LSU Terrible Towel. And it was a tiger stripe, gold with purple stripe bandana. And my dad actually introduced Jeff to Don Landers to see if Don could exclusively sell the tiger rags in his Cracker Barrels. So Jeff gave him samples of tiger rags, and he put them in Cracker Barrels all around Baton Rouge area. And Jeff would go to the Cracker Barrels and he'd go buy them all. And then Don Landers was like, well, hey, give me an order of 15,000. And so Jeff would buy them back from Circle K and then have us go around the neighborhood selling them back to people to get his money back. Well, eventually Don put in an order. I want to say $15,000. So Jeff was selling them for $1. So Don wrote him out. No, Jeff was selling them for $2. So Don wrote out a check. He was buying them for $1, selling them for $2, for $15,000. That was the down payment. So when Jeff would give him the 15,000 bandanas, he'd write him another check for 15,000. Well, Jeff took the first 15,000 and blew it. So he couldn't order the bandanas. So he couldn't bring the product. So I think Don Landers was the one who was pressing like some type of charges or some kind of type of civil case, but I think it was a combination of both. And Jeff had a court date coming up, and that's when he decided he was going to leave town with me and take me, since I had been his love interest for the past, 9 months to a year.
This is when he kidnapped you.
This is when he kidnapped me. So on like February 19th, 1984, his brother dropped him off at the house, and he asked my mom, "Can I borrow your car?" Another karate student, his parents were building a house not far from Country Club of Louisiana, and it's a beautiful house. And Jeff's brother owned a carpet business. And so Jeff was like, "I got to go see if the carpet's been delivered. Jody, come ride with me." All right, get in the car. We're not heading to the house. We're heading to his brother's house in Gonzales. And I'm like, where are we going? And he's like, "I'm going now." Because he had told me, if I don't get the money, I'm going to go to California. I'm going to take you with me. And he's like, "We're going to California." So at this point, I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going to California.
And you're not fighting any of this.
No.
Because you have no idea what's really happening. Or you do?
Well, no, I knew exactly what was happening. I knew he was wrong. I knew he was kidnapping. But I was so under control of him, the coercive control, that, even when Jeff wasn't even around, he still had control over me. I would go, if I was at the house and my classmates called me, "Hey, what was page number do we have for homework?" I would go run in the back on the little, wireless phones. So in case Jeff showed up, he wouldn't see me on the phone, and who are you talking to? Oh, it was one of my classmates. What you like your classmate? He was just those guilt trips and all these power control things over me. And so, I was under his spell. And so at this point, I'm like, you know what? I'm better off just being quiet. Eventually, he's going to get himself caught. And don't fight it. Don't try to run. We get to California. That was a Sunday. We go to his mother's house. His mother calls my mom and says, "Look, Jeff is here with Jody. He's going to bring him back tomorrow. So don't call the cops. He's going to bring him back tomorrow."
Where is his mother?
Port Arthur, Texas.
Okay.
So that Monday, Jeff and me and his mother and her mother's friend, we went to Jeff's uncle's house in Vinton, Louisiana. And the whole point was to get money. We need to borrow money. Jeff needs to he was saying he was going to New York. And so that's how he was able to kind of con his mom. "Look, Jody's going to ride with me to Baton Rouge. June can come pick him up, and the bus is going to travel on to New York City." So I guess he got enough money to get 2 tickets to California. So that Tuesday, we go to Orange, Texas to go to the bus station. Now, at the same time, my mother and the sheriffs, they're all heading, because he didn't come home Monday. He didn't bring me Monday. So they're heading. Now my mom's called the police, the sheriff's department, and they're going to Port Arthur to look for me. Mm-hmm. They probably missed me by an hour. And so we got on a bus to Los Angeles, and it took us through, I went to Austin, Phoenix, Tucson, El Paso. It was, for me, I love to travel, even if I'm kidnapped. I was just enjoying myself.
There's a sentence I don't think I've ever heard before.
Well, no. Last year, I went to Richmond, Virginia to do a speaking engagement. And then after, my friend was like, "Hey, come up to Pennsylvania." Philadelphia, it's only like a 4-hour drive. And I was like, all right. So it was Easter weekend. So Friday night, I hung out with my one friend, and I was like, you know what, Saturday night, I'm going to hang out with my other friend. And then that Sunday, I decided to drive home. So it's Easter Sunday, and I'm in Virginia, and I see a sign, Blue Ridge Parkway. And I was like, you know what? I don't have anywhere to be till Tuesday. I'm going to jump on that Blue Ridge Parkway and check it out. 70 miles, 3 hours, the most terrified I have ever been in a vehicle ever. The Blue Ridge Parkway is almost the size of 2 golf cart paths together. You can't go more than 35 or 45 miles an hour, so that was nice. But you're also 2,500 feet in the air, and you're like, and I'm scared of heights. So I was like,
oh, God.
That was the most terrifying 3 hours I've spent in a vehicle, and I took a bus to California on my kidnapping. So, it was, yeah.
Wow.
But I am destined to go back to the Blue Ridge Parkway because I know I was traumatized from the experience because I spent the next 2 weeks just watching every YouTube video on the Blue Ridge Parkway because you have, I could be a Blue Ridge Parkway tour guide. So we get to LA about 2 a.m, and so we have no place to go. So we hang out in the bus station, and they had like them old pay TVs. You could put a quarter in, you could watch like 10 minutes of a TV show. And at one point, a guy came up and was like, "Oh, do y'all have tickets? Y'all can't stay here. If y'all don't have tickets, y'all can't stay at the bus station." Because it was 1984, and Los Angeles was hosting the Olympics. And so it was before we knew who Mary Lou Retton was. And so Jeff's like, "No, look, I got tickets." And the guy's like, "Okay, y'all are good. Y'all stay." And I saw like, you know how in Coming to America when they lost their luggage and the guy was like, "Hey man, you want a toothbrush?" They had guys like that in there. They also had, it's the first time I'd ever seen a pay toilet. You had to like pay money to go into the toilet to use it.
Oh.
Yeah. And I also, it was the first time I ever seen the little things you pull down and you put over the toilet seat. Normally we just did the little nest that you make with the toilet paper before you sit on the public toilet seat. So we spent the morning in the bus station, and when the sun came up, Jeff's like, "Okay, how can I get some money? I got to get some money." He had a few dollars left. So he goes to the newsstand and he buys a Karate Illustrated magazine. And in the back, you had advertisements for different karate schools, this, that, and the other. And we had fought at a tournament in Houston. And the guy who was the host, his name was Al Garza. He still has a karate studio as far as I know as of last year because I went by and I dropped off of a book. I put it on his door because I was going to a funeral like literally 5 minutes away. The funeral home, the gravesite was 5 minutes away. So I bought him a book and I put it on the door. Hopefully he got it because I appreciate what he did for me. And so Jeff called him and he said, "Look, Al," they weren't good friends, but they knew each other. "Hey, look, Al, I took a group out here to California. Our van got stolen. Can you wire me $600 so I can get back to Louisiana and I'll pay you back as soon as I get back?" Didn't hesitate. Western Union's $600. Jeff picked up $550. Now, he did something stupid that night. He went to like the downtown Hilton and he got like a room, I think at the time was like $85, which was a lot, especially when you're kidnapping someone so he went and it was almost like his honeymoon. So that was the one night that was one of 2 nights that wasn't real good for me. And then the next day we went to Canoga Park because his brother had used to live there and that's where Jeff dreamed of going. So we went to Canoga Park and we walked around pretty much all day. We took the city bus to Canoga Park, and that's the first time I got to see the Hollywood sign. So again, remember, I'm on kidnap, but I'm like, whoa, that's so cool.
You're fascinated.
Yes. So we take the city bus back to the bus station. We catch a Greyhound from LA to Anaheim. We check into a hotel room that night, and that was the second night that wasn't good. And then the next day, we went to Disneyland. And after Disneyland, I think he dyed my hair after Disneyland. And then, or maybe he dyed it before Disneyland. That's why he was willing to take me to Disneyland. Anyway, at some point, he dyes my blonde hair black at this point in Anaheim. Well, we were staying in a motel called the Samoa Motel at 425 West Catella Street. It's still there. It's not the Samoa Motel. It's the America's Best Value Inn. It's literally a block from Disneyland. And my niece was doing a dance conference last year in Anaheim. And I was like, "You ought to go check it out." And she did. She videotaped it, and she shows her walking in. I told her exactly where the room was. Ironically enough, it was room 38, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So she was like, "Oh, my God, I kind of got a little emotional just thinking like, this is kind of like our family history." And this, so I was like, but it was cool. I'm glad she did it. And anybody who goes to Anaheim, I always tell them, go check out the Best America's Value in the far right corner. That's where I was. So we stayed there for a couple of days. One day, Jeff actually left me alone, all alone, for all day in a hotel room to go look for a job. He had his brother's Michael. He had his brother's Michael fake ID, or no, real ID, birth certificate, because his mom went and got that for him when we were in Port Arthur. So he was going to pass himself off as his brother. And so he went to the DMV, then he went looking for a job, and eventually the next day we went to like the Fullerton Mall and kind of walked around. And meanwhile, it's February and I think it's cool because it's warm outside and I can jump into the hot tub and having a good time. After a week, he says, call your mom, let her know you're okay. And so I called my mom and let her know I was okay. And so that started the series of phone calls, which I wish we had. That would be great because hopefully we'll be doing a 3-part documentary here soon. And that would be gold. if we had that, but I don't know if we can find them. But he started interacting and calling my mother, telling her grab the other three kids, grab their transcripts, meet me in New York. And he screwed up because at one time he said, if you don't meet me in New York, you'll never see Jody alive again. And so that took simple kidnapping and turned into aggravated kidnapping, which is mandatory life, no probation, no parole. So in my opinion, to this day, I do believe Jeff was going to jail for the rest of his life. There was a big enough case. The evidence that they had for them, the DA's office, to allow my dad to cop to a plea with no jail time would have been the same evidence they were going to use to put Jeff in jail for the rest of his life. So he was going to jail for the rest of his life. And people ask me all the time, and I tell them, I was like, look, that was, to this day, is still my preference.
The week that you have now been kidnapped, is there a part of you that's saying, like, hey, something's not right, or I don't belong here, I need to call mom, or are you still in this, like, this is a little vacation for me?
I'm still, let's wait and see what happens.
Okay.
You know, I never felt threatened. I never felt Jeff would harm me, but I also have a friend of mine who did like a psychological profile of Jeff, and he absolutely would have if it came down to it, I believe, at this point. I didn't back then, obviously.
Were you being abused this whole time?
Like I said, there was only really 2 nights that he had to, I guess the stress level was low, that he felt like, performing. But eventually what happened was he got caught. He allowed me to call my mother, but we were running out of money. Okay. So at this point, before we were paying for the calls as we made them, this time he was like, call collect. So when I called her collect, Mike Burnett was at the house. They were, had the phone where you can listen in, and they're recording everything. And I heard my mother say something to the operator before she accepted the charges. And Jeff heard me say, what was that? So something threw Jeff off. So when I finished that conversation with my mother, Jeff got on the phone and called her right back. He's like, what the hell were you asking him? What were you saying? Blah, 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 blah. Well, what she had asked was for the operator to give her time and charges. So for those who don't know, when you couldn't afford to make a phone call, you could call 0. The operator would come on. You say, I'd like to make a collect call to this number. They'd call the number and they ask you your name. And the operator would say, hey, look, there's a collect call from Jody. Will you accept the charges? Meaning, will you pay for them? So when my mother accepted it, the operator came back after my phone call with her and said that call was, 12 minutes long and it's going to cost you $44 because they were expensive back then. And so Jeff called my mother back and was on the phone with her, and I heard a key in the door, and I heard a knock, 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 and then boom, and then police officers everywhere, guns in my face, guns at him. The last thing I remember was a guy walking, not the last thing I remember, but seeing in the room was a guy walked around the bed because Jeff was on the other side of the bed up against the wall, and he's like, I ought to punch you in the goddamn mouth. And so then they pulled me out of there, and then that was the last time I saw Jeff again. They sat me on this little wall near the pool, and I was just shaking. And they were like, are you cold? I'm like, no, I'm scared. They're like, oh, there's nowhere to be scared. I'm like, no, I'm not scared now. I'm scared from when y'all put all the guns in my face and came busting in the room. That's what scared me. So then they took me to the police station, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. And they questioned me probably 2-3 hours. And I told mostly the truth. But I think the things I lied about was, yes, my mother knew where I was. She let Jeff take me. And the sexual abuse. They asked me, like, where did you sleep? In bed. Where did Jeff sleep? In bed. What did you wear? My underwear. What did Jeff wear? His underwear. I was telling the truth. All right, when did y'all leave? Where did y'all go? Everything about the truth, boom, 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 boom. It was good. And, of course, they didn't believe me. Well, I also knew my next destination was going to be the hospital. So sure enough, they take me from the police station to the hospital, and they give me a complete physical exam, a forensic kit, rape kit, what they call it now. And eventually, well, let's go back. So after that, after the physical, they take me to like this neglected kids home. And again, I go in there, they take my clothes. It was almost like when people check into prison. Okay, here's your wallet, here's your keys. And I had to go take a shower. They put me in their clothes. I had to put on their clothes. And they led me to bed probably like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, I guess, by that time. And I'm sleeping. Then they're trying to wake me up to go to school. I'm like, I ain't going to school. Like, I ain't going to be here that long. So one of the counselors was like, oh, yeah, he got in here late. Let him sleep. So eventually I didn't sleep that long because I couldn't because they were talking and the sun was up. And I got up and I started watching Rocky 3. Then it was time for me to go get another physical. So I went and go get a physical from their nurse, and then I got to meet with the social worker. I didn't like the social worker at all.
This is still all in California.
This is all in California. It's still all the same night, practically. And so I spend that day at the home, and I'm like sad, just because, one, it's a lot, especially for an 11-year-old. But, I knew Jeff was arrested, and I knew I had the hospital report. I knew all this was going to come out. So my dad ended up getting me a plane ticket flying home from L.A. We left like at 1:10 a.m., and we arrived in New Orleans at 6 a.m. And it's the only time I've ever slept on an airplane. But we took off. I was excited I had a window seat, but I was on the Pacific Ocean side of the plane. So as you take off, you go over the ocean, then you make a big turn. Well, you see pitch black for 30 minutes. So I was like, whatever, I'm going to sleep. I could see lights out the other side of the plane. So I ended up falling asleep, and they woke me up into, like, get up, you got to put your seat up. So, we were coming into final landing. And then I get off the plane, and I'm walking down the little hallway. And when I get off the hallway, I see my mom, I see my dad, and they're all smiling and happy. And I see John Pastorak, and I see a camera, and I was pissed. If you watch the video, I was so pissed off, and my mother hugs me, and she leans over and she's like, your dad called him. Because my dad used to work at Channel 2 when he was in college. He used to work at Channel 2. He used to drink at the Cotton Club, which was less than a half a mile from Channel 2. He was on their bowling team with Channel 2, and he was good friends with everybody behind the scenes at Channel 2, and even John Mahaffey. So looking back, I don't blame my dad, because my dad's like, my son's coming home, and they're like, hey, we'll come home and we'll film it. All right, so if that doesn't happen, they don't do the follow-up. And the follow-up is what everybody remembers. So I get back, and like I said, they filmed the B-roll of us walking down the corridor, and I got my hands in my pocket. I don't hug my parents. I look like an abused 11-year-old. If you want to know what an 11-year-old looks like that's been abused for the last year, go watch that video. So we get home. Now my mother's obsessed with getting my hair dyed back to blonde. And so I had to go to the hairdresser to try to get and it was a product. We had to do this, we had to do that. And when it eventually came out, she'd have just been better off shaving my head because it looked like shit. And then I get to go to school. I get to go back to school. So first day back at school, I walk into the gym with my golden hair, and literally the whole school shut up. We get off the bus, we go into the gym, and my friend Brian and all my other friends were across the basketball court at the stage, and you had the two bleachers, and everybody's like, they're watching me walk. And so I walk.
Do they know?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody knows at this point.
That this kid had been kidnapped, yeah. Because my brother at some point had to go explain to the teachers why I wasn't going to school. That way I wouldn't get negative days. So I get up to my friend Brian, and there's 3 or 4 female friends around us, and I could see they had tears, and some of them have tears in their eyes, and they're just looking at me like they don't know what to say. And I just looked at them. I said, "What? Y'all are looking at me like I've been kidnapped or something." And then they started laughing, and they were like, "Okay, Jody's still Jody. We're good." So we walk into my room, my homeroom, and there's a big sign, "Welcome back, Jody," and everybody signed it. "Hey, glad you're back." Blah blah blah. And then I sit down and look over at the billboard, and we had a current events board. And this is you can Google this out there if you don't believe me. John Travolta played a character in a TV movie called The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. And on the billboard of current events was a picture of me with my signature in the headline, "Boy from Plastic Bubble Dies." And so I looked at my teacher and I was like, y'all weren't giving me much of a chance of returning, were y'all? Because they put it. And so then that kind of eased the pain. So things just got back to normal. And this is kind of neat. On February, no, not this is neat. This next week's neat. So on February 8th was a Thursday. My mother comes to me and she said, "I just got a call from Mike Barnett from the sheriff's department." And he was like, "He wants to talk to me and your dad."
And for people who don't know, Mike Barnett is with the sheriff's office, and he was the detective on this case.
He was the lead detective. He was a major at the time. He also was a personal friend of my mother and father. He went to junior high school and high school with my dad. They weren't close friends, but they knew each other. And my mother, before she even met my dad, dated Mike for 9 months. So that's why Mike was the first phone call that my mother made. And that's why he was leading the investigation. That's why he went out to California. So March 8th, he wants to meet with my mom and dad. So March 9th, they meet at my house. And I knew what was going to happen. I knew that the hospital report was going to come back. And I knew that's what why he wanted to meet, excuse me.
Now, your parents do not know until now that you've been abused by Jeff.
Yes, they don't know at this time because I lied the whole time. I was not going to tell on Jeff because I knew I'd gone to the hospital. I knew the hospital report was going to come back positive, and I knew if I didn't tell on Jeff, I could always say, you got yourself caught. I didn't tell on you because I thought he may have gotten out and then wanted to come back at me.
Okay.
So sure enough, I'm all nervous that day at school. I get to the bus stop on my way home from school that day, and there's my mother sitting in the car at the bus stop waiting for me. And she tells my brother, you know what, you go play. Jody will be with y'all in a little while. So she brings me home. She sits me down on the couch. Now, Mike Barnett had told her, look, you need to be quiet. I mean, you need to be calm. You know, just listen, hear him out, be calm. Because if you get upset, you being upset might be more damaging to him than the actual abuse itself because he doesn't want to upset you. That's why he has been keeping it quiet.
He being you.
Me, yeah.
Okay.
So she sits me down and she's like, Mike Barnett came over today, almost too calm. And he told us that the hospital report came back and he said that it came back positive. And I tried to be stupid. I was like, pretend I was stupid. I was like, oh, what does that mean? And she's like, it means Jeff fooled with you. And I looked at her and I said, yep, he did. How long's it been going on? About a year. Oh, really? And so, you know, I forget what kind of details we may have gone into that, you know, therapy session, but it wasn't long. And she goes, okay, well, go outside and play. And I just remember just like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulder. I just remember getting on a bike and riding to my friend Crystal's house. And I was just so happy on the way over there. I drove the bike into the ditch where they were all sitting and hanging out. And it's the first time in over a year I could be a kid. I could be me. Mm-hmm. I could go out and play. I didn't have to worry about Jeff going. The coercive control had been lifted off of me. And so I was really, really, really just happy that was going on.
Did your dad talk to you at all?
No, I never talked to my dad about it.
Okay.
So, but I talked to my mother, and she would go back and tell him. But I had told her, don't tell Daddy, because I didn't want Daddy to know. But she felt he was my father, and he deserved to know. So a week later, I get off school. It's my dad's weekend to Havas. My grandparents are at the house, and I'm still kind of like pissed at Daddy because Jeff, you know, made me like, you know, kind of put a wedge in between us. And I'm like, you know, Daddy's always bitching about he wants to see his kids, but, you know, it's his weekend to come get us, and he can't even show up to the house to pick us up and bring us out to the camp. He's going to send his parents. I mean, they're old. I'm like, they don't need that burden. It's his job. It's his responsibility. And that's what I'm thinking. I'm mad at him. So we go out to False River that evening, and we had a routine where me and my little brother would go down to the bank, and we'd try to like the fish would sleep like right up on the bank, and we'd try to catch them, but we couldn't. To this day, still haven't caught one of them bastards. But I can't even catch them with a hook and bait, let alone with my hand. And so for whatever reason, I mean, I guess I'd been through a long 3 weeks with the kidnapping, and I was just exhausted. I remember being in the bathtub and draining a lot of the water out of the bathtub. So there was only like this much, just so I could lay in that warm water. And just in case I fell asleep, I wouldn't drown. That's why I put the water so low. And I normally would watch the news, believe it or not, but I was exhausted and I went to bed early that night. So the next morning I wake up and my grandparents was like, come on, get your stuff. We're going back to Baton Rouge. Get your stuff. And I'm like, where's Daddy? Why are we going back to Baton Rouge? Come on, kids. We're going back to Baton Rouge. And they seemed very concerned. I wouldn't say sad, but they were concerned. I knew something was up. Now, my thinking was, I mean, my dad used to drink a lot. And I mean, back then, you know, people weren't so mad about people who drink and drive. And so I'm thinking Daddy probably got in a car wreck. He was drunk driving, got in a car wreck, or he got a DWI and he's in jail. So I'm thinking, notice I said DWI because that's what it was back then. It wasn't a DUI. And so they're not talking on the ride back to Baton Rouge. And I'm like, okay, something's definitely up, but I have no clue. So me and my older brother were out back at my grandparents' house. They live right by G and Gonzalez in Standard Heights. And so we were out, they got this big loading ramp, and we were out playing on the loading ramp and stuff. And I saw my mother pull up with my uncle, the one who was the sheriff's deputy that I suspect didn't do the background check. And that's when I knew, okay, something was really wrong. And so she sat the 4 kids on the steps and she said, I just want y'all to know, last night, Daddy shot Jeff when Jeff was returned home, and it was on TV. And I'm like, whoa. Like, I think one of my siblings said good. My sister started crying, going, my daddy's going to jail. And I was actually, I was like, is Jeff dead? And they're like, officially no, because he hadn't been pronounced dead, because they kept him on life support so they could harvest his organs. I think they took him to New Orleans to take out his organs, and then they pronounced him dead on the 17th, because the shooting took place on Friday, March 16th. And so they were like, it's not good. Don't get your hopes up. And so I remember being sad all day, and they told me not to watch the news. And the first thing I did was ran to the store and got the paper. I watched the 6 o'clock news. That was the first time I saw it. That Saturday, March 17th, the 6 o'clock news is when I first saw it.
Okay, when we're saying you first saw it, our viewers don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, we
Your father shot Jeff, the man who had been raping you and had kidnapped you, on live TV.
All right, so let's go back to February 16th, March 16th. My dad's having lunch at the Cotton Club, and the program director, his name was Bob Shadell. He looks at my dad and he's like, hey, Gary, when they bring your boy back? And my dad's like, yeah, they wouldn't tell me. And he goes, I think they actually came back already. And Bob Shadell was like, no, I don't think so. Let me go find out. So he goes over to the old phone booth like Superman would get into inside of the Cotton Club. He got into the old phone booth, called up to Channel 2, and he came back to my dad. He's like, nah, he'll be in about 9:08 tonight. Now, was he trying to create a news story? Absolutely. Was he trying to create the news story he's got? He had no clue either. And so Channel 2 sent a crew up there, and my dad, having this knowledge, had taken the gun from that house the night before, because the 15th, LSU played Dayton in March Madness. It was the first round. They played Dayton. They lost. But we had watched Hill Street Blues, because when me and Jeff were walking around downtown LA the first day, we saw these cameras and police officers, and Jeff didn't want to go near them. But I was like, no, I'd seen them filming the toy. I said, I think they're filming a TV show or a movie. And so we walked down, and sure enough, Jeff's favorite TV show was Hill Street Blues. So we're watching them film it. We watched for like 3 hours. And that episode aired that night. So my dad came over to watch the Hill Street Blues. He came over to watch the LSU basketball game with me. And then him and my mom were outside for like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And when my mother came back in, I was like, were you telling Daddy what I'd told her? And so turns out she was trying to get the gun, because he had taken it out of the top of the closet where we kept it, and she was trying to get the gun back. All right, so it's Friday, March 16th. Now my dad has this information that this program director had told him, and he's got the gun. So he made it out to Falls River. He made it out like Jerry's Quick Stop, and he called his best friend. And I guess he was saying, like, this is something I can't live with. I got to go handle business. And so he hung up the phone. He drove back to the airport. When he got there, he went to the bar, had him a beer or two. And I guess he saw the camera crew go upstairs. So then that's when he went upstairs, and he got on a payphone. He called his best friend. He was actually, people think, oh, he was pretending to be on the phone. He was talking to his best friend. In the drive from Falls River to the airport, my dad's best friend called the sheriff's department and said, look, my friend's on his way to the airport. He's going to shoot this prisoner that they're transporting. You got to get in touch with Mike Barnett, let him know, because he was thinking that they were going to shoot my dad. My dad was thinking they were going to shoot him, so he didn't care. So he went there to die and take care of Jeff. He said one of us was going to die that night, if not both of us. And so finally, Mike Barnett shows up and came out into the lobby, the lobby of the terminal, and was looking for my dad. There had been about 30 or 40 people that had gathered behind the camera thinking, ooh, I wonder what celebrities come in. Let's see, why is the cameras here? What's going on? Let's see what's going on. And so Mike's looking behind the camera, but he also has lights in his face. So he doesn't see my dad. He turns around and he waves. That's where the video picks up. He waves Bud and Jeff, and they come around the corner, and you can see Bud Connors, the other sheriff's deputy that went out to Los Angeles, and he's walking next to Jeff. And you could see him talking, and he's telling Jeff, look, if you see anybody hit the ground, I'll cover you. And Jeff and Bud are both looking at the crowd behind the camera. And so if you watch carefully, you can see that the wall indents about 4 feet, and there's a row of payphones. So my dad was in that 4-foot indention on the phone, and he could see him coming out of the side of his glasses. He could see him. But he also knew to time him perfectly because he was a cameraman, when the lights got parallel with him, he knew it was time to shoot. So that's why his timing is so perfect when he just turns around, puts the gun up and shoots him one time with a .38 stub-nose caliber. Now, the reason why I said earlier that .38, we'll get to that later, is because Jeff was arrested in room 38. Daddy was 38 years old when he shot him with a .38. So Jeff was always scared of like 13. He should have been scared of 38. All right, so my dad obviously is arrested. Channel 2 gets the footage. They got to figure out, all right, what do we air? Are we going to air this tonight? How much do we air? And so they literally got...
Back up. He shoots him live. This is all live.
Well, it was being recorded. The news aired live. So when people say, oh, he shot him on live TV, no, they weren't going, hey, we're here covering Jeff Doucet. He should be coming any minute now. No, they filmed it at about 9:30, and they beamed it back to the station. So John Spain... what was John Spain? He was the news director. So he could decide, all right, are we going to show this or are we not going to show this? And there's a video on YouTube, and John Spain said that, after a couple news cycles, you don't show the same video. He said this was the only time that a violent video like this, people were calling me saying, why aren't you showing it? Because of the situation that was a father protecting his child from a child molester.
Jeff died?
Jeff, he died before he hit the ground, but they kept him alive on life support. So officially he died the next day. They harvested his organs. So fast forward, it's 84, not fast forward, but it's 84. There's a DA race coming up, and that was a big contingent. How are you going to handle the Plauche case? My dad was not indicted until 9 months later. They had to make sure that the grand jury that indicted Jeff was a different grand jury to look at my dad's case. So ultimately, my dad had a lawyer, Foxy Sanders, who wasn't agreeing to do a plea deal. He had signed a contract, a book and TV deal, where it had to go to court, so they had the public records. And so they found out about it, and my dad's psychiatrist, he told my dad, look, I got to tell you something, and I can't tell you why, but if I tell you to do it, or do you trust me enough to do it? He said, yeah. He said, you got to fire Foxy. And what it was is Foxy was not accepting this deal. So Daddy fired Foxy. He hired Anthony Marabella, and Marabella eventually became a judge in Baton Rouge. He basically made sure my dad was taken care of, or gave the advice, and my dad listened. And eventually my dad pled no contest to manslaughter, and he was sentenced by the judge to 7 years hard time, suspended, 300 hours of more community service, and 5 years probation. And my dad served that without incident. He did his community service at St. George Catholic Church and school. And, I think he was never a problem. He didn't get in trouble. I think he got one DWI on Thanksgiving years later, but that was it.
What went through you to hear all of this? You're obviously an adult now, and you're a child at that time, but how has this impacted your life?
Well, one of the things that really kind of bothered me a lot, and people are like, well, why were you upset with your dad? One, yeah, I felt an emotional connection to Jeff because I'd been with him every day for a year. But at that point, nobody knew about the sexual abuse except for my parents. And of course, that had to come out so my dad could get the public sympathy. So that was tough on me at first, but it took a couple months. But after a couple months, I remember we were walking down to the neighborhood pool, and I remember telling my dad, look, I'm not mad at you anymore. I understand why you did it. And I think that meant a lot to him. But I immediately got back into sports. I started playing baseball down at Perkins Road Park, and it was funny because you had a group of the U-High team, their coaches were prosecutors in the DA's office, and they had a team. My dad was watching us play, and then some of the peers, like the ninth grade students that were watching their friends play baseball. I'm looking at Sally Bush, who's Brian Bush's daughter, and I'm like, I would love to go talk to her. She's beautiful, but but I can't because her dad's prosecuting my father, you know? So it was really a weird kind of dynamic back then, but I got back to normal and everything was fine. How does it affect me now? In 1991, me and my dad went to New York City to film the Geraldo Rivera talk show. And I was all about, hey, let's go be on TV. Let's go to a Yankees game. Let's go to Empire State Building. Let's get a free trip to New York City. So we do the show. The show airs June 4th, 1991. A couple days later, I get a call from Mike Burnett, saying Mike Burnett, and he said, this is going to be in the news, it's going to be in the paper, but we arrested this pastor who had been sexually abusing these two boys, and one boy saw you on the Geraldo show and gave you credit for giving him the strength to tell. And the weird thing, I got to put this in here, that day when we filmed it in April, they had two shows that day. The first show was called The Day the Music Died, and it was about the Buddy Holly, Big Bopper, and Richie Valens plane crash that killed him. I got to meet Buddy Holly's wife. I got to meet Donna, the song by Richie Valens, his girlfriend, ex-girlfriend or whatever. I got to meet Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue. I got to meet Peggy Sue, and Little Richard was also on the show, so I got to meet Little Richard. All right, so let's just fast forward, because this is kind of weird. Let's just fast forward a little bit. And this was like last year. I finally figured out that the day the music died, February 3rd, 1959, is the day that Jeff was born. He was born on that day. So what are the odds that the day the music died would be the Geraldo episode? That episode that aired with me would change my life, because I'm like, now I can share my story. Because, you know, people go, well, you know, if I can just help only one. Well, I helped two and I wasn't even trying. So that's when my life was changed. I was like, you know what? I need to continue to speak out. I need to write a book. I need to be a positive role model. And so, yeah, I mean, that was just kind of like a weird coincidence that all that came together.
I mean, I have to say it's amazing for you to speak up. You have a book, but what you may not realize is the amount of people you touched.
And you know what? I told someone not too long ago, I was like, you know, knowing what happened, if someone said, could you relive your life? Absolutely. Yeah, from the get-go. I mean, keep my mother from going to the Notre Dame LSU go with complications. I mean, even with the kidnapping and everything. Like, I mean, my life has been so wonderful. I have no regrets.
That's great to hear.
Except for regretting by getting choked up just now. But other than that, I'm good.
Oh, hey. I just got Jody choked up, the comedian.
Oh, well, no, you know what? After I turned 50, I turned into like Dick Vermeil. Like, everything makes me cry. Only 3 movies have ever made me cry. And you're probably going to laugh when you hear it.
Titanic.
No. I knew how that was going to end. The Sandlot, Cool Runnings, and Beaches. Beaches was the first. Beaches got me good.
Well, hold on. Let's back up. So, as a man, is there a part of you that says, my dad loved me that much? Or what how do you justify it? What do you...
Well, looking back, you know, like I said, at first I was upset at Jeff. And to this day, I wish Jeff would have gone to Angola for the rest of his life. But I'll concede that's a pretty cool video, and my dad not going to jail and being with us and being in our lives, you know. But to me, the thing I respect the most, or maybe not respect, but I like the most or love the most, is the fact to what my dad means to other people. He is a symbol of justice, and that to me is what I appreciate.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I am so thankful that you opened up and shared your story, and I say that as if you haven't been opening up, but I would pray that if there are people out there who are being victimized, who are being abused, they are able to stand up. And any finishing tips to kind of, that did not come out right.
Just the tips.
We're not going to say finishing tips. 11:27. As we close, I know you said you discussed things in your book, but if there are people out there who are listening, who maybe are right now being victimized, any advice from you of what to say or what to do?
You know, tell a trusted adult. I mean, the empowerment philosophy that we had at Victim Services Center is like, you know, weigh your options. Look at what your options are. You can call the RAIN hotline. You can call the local rape crisis center. You can reach out. You don't have to call police, but I mean, I advise going through the process, even though it's slanted against the victim. But the one thing I would like to say to parents, and this is probably the most important thing, that if there's someone out there who wants to spend more time with your child than you do, that's a red flag.
Good point. Now, your dad has passed, correct?
Yeah, it'll be 10 years in October.
Okay, and your mom?
She's still hanging in there.
Good, good. Well, Jody, again, we thank you for your time. We thank you for speaking up and now pretty much being an advocate.
Very much so.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us. To our listeners, thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode of Louisiana Unfiltered.